I'm Jessica Birch, and I'm a training coordinator with the Corporation for National and Community Service, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. I'll also be facilitating the live Q&A at the end of the session. Also joining us are Amy Kanata and Jenny Farrell from our partners at Education Northwest, who have helped to prepare today's webinar and will be managing the WebEx technology. You'll also see them in the chat and Q&A to help address questions you may have during the session. So, before we start with session goals, I want to go over the question that was on the first slide. We asked you, what do you find the most challenging when creating VADs? And we got a lot of responses, so thank you. So just to read some of these out, one person here said that one of the things that they find most challenging is knowing what is required in a VAD. Also, the ever-evolving needs of an agency makes it hard to articulate the specifics need of not only the project, but the community as a whole. We also got other responses here that the challenge is describing the work that the VISTA will be doing in the right language and still have it mean something. Also, I suppose that find anticipating our agency's needs one of the most challenging aspects of creating a VAD. Also, anticipating the volunteers' level of productivity and skill. These are fabulous. Definitely not fabulous to have these challenges, but fabulous because we're going to be talking a lot about these during this session today. And if you have any other lingering questions at the end of the session, we encourage you to join our Q&A. So, as I'm on the topic of what we're going to be talking about today, let's talk about session goals. So, by the end of the webinar, we hope that you'll be able to articulate the key elements of an effective VAD, as well as define VISTA's focus on capacity building and community engagement. We also hope that you'll be able to write member activities that reflect VISTA's focus on capacity building and community engagement. And last, but definitely not least, we hope that you'll be able to work with VADs as a living document that is tailored to the needs of their community and organization. So, helping us reach these goals today is our speaker, Kathy Lenz of Development Plus Incorporated. Kathy has been working with AmeriCorps VISTA sponsors since 1998 to help supervisors and VISTAs begin their service. In addition, she works with nonprofits on organizational development and community engagement across the U.S. and on multiple continents. So now I'll turn this over to Kathy to get us started. Kathy, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thanks. First of all, I want to really thank everybody who submitted their areas of interest and questions about the VADs when you registered, and as well as the introduction piece. I'm going to be working to weave those in today's session. Please continue to use the chat box and the Q&A section as you have. We've designed this so that we can actually have some time to interact with one another as we go forward on this piece. I especially love that you actually have been helping each other, giving each other suggestions along the way, so please continue. Let's get started with talking about some basics. VAD stands for Volunteer Assignment Description, and the VAD or VAD details the activities that a VISTA member will perform during the year of service. In this case, VISTA sponsors are asked to fill out a VISTA Assignment Description form for each VISTA member who serves on a VISTA project. VADs are written per year, per assignment. For example, in a 3-year project that has one VISTA per year, that would require 3 separate VADs. Similarly, projects with several VISTAs will require a unique VAD for each VISTA member. And those VADs are the foundation on which the entire VISTA member experience is built. Presenting a VISTA with a strong VAD at the start of service ensures the member knows what they'll be doing. That's really important as they're getting ready to come into the pre-service orientation because it makes it so much easier for them. Today, we're going to review the key elements that make up an effective VAD that will guide members to build capacity and engage community in the organization where they serve. So specifically, when we look at some of the particulars of what a VAD does, for each VISTA, a VAD explains the project position and role assigned to a member. Basically, it serves as their project description and work plan. The VADs are used as learning and orientation tools at VISTA pre-service orientation. That's the program that they come to when they first start. A complete VAD includes the goals, objectives, and activities a member is expected to complete in order to satisfy a project needs. If we've written these well, it helps translate the milestones that we've talked about in our proposal into a realistic set of activities here in our VADs. So those VADs are going to help VISTAs identify a course of action. And the supervisors can use the VAD to frame a few really important conversations with VISTAs. The VAD will indicate the project priorities, the organizational and community challenges, and the purpose of the project. It helps if supervisors keep this in mind. The VAD is a living document. The VAD can be adapted as the project evolves and as the unique strengths of the VISTAs become apparent. Significant changes to the VAD should be discussed with your corporation state office, however, just as a note of caution so that we don't go crazy. We want to make sure we talk to people about it. The VAD has multiple uses, both before the VISTA starts at their site, because we're going to use it to actually recruit them and help in the selection process, and once they've arrived, we're going to actually use it to help guide their performance. So keeping that in mind will help you create a better VAD. I also just want to note in here about e-grants, because there are a couple of questions came in on that piece. All VADs must be created through your e-grants account. We're not going to go into how to work within e-grants in this session, but I do want to note that there are some pieces about VAD creation and its impact and about its use in e-grants on the VISTA campus. So for more information about the e-grant system, be sure to take a look at some of the new resources that have been developed. And Amy's adding actually something to the chat box now to talk about how to access some of those guides and aids that will help you through the process to really work with the e-grant system. So some of the core principles that the VAD is based on include sustainability, building capacity, and empowering communities. I want to take a look particularly at the last two and just lightly highlight the first one as we get started in this process. I'd like to start out with a chat question, so if folks could add this to the chat box. What is sustainability of the project? Another way to say that would be, what would we see happening if a project was sustainable beyond the VISTAs being there? I'd like to ask you to enter your ideas into the chat box and be sure you send it to all participants.
Thank you, Kathy. So as we wait for those answers to come in, we know it's a question that requires some good thinking here. So what would we see, or what would you see happening if a project was sustainable beyond the VISTAs being there? So as these come in, I'm going to read some of these out. So Mark here said the organization does not start from scratch each year, which is fantastic. There's no hole in human resources after the VISTA ends their term of service. Also, the work continues after the VISTA assignment ends, which is extremely important. VISTA is a limited resource, so we want to make sure that that work continues even after the VISTA is no longer there. Volunteers and staff are trained to take over a program. Fantastic. Written policies, procedures, manuals, et cetera, that can be used by organization and staff in the future. Fantastic there. The project can carry on under its own strength after the VISTA service period ends. Definitely seeing a theme here, and this is a great theme. A continuing flow of highly ambitious and organized volunteers. That's always a great way to ensure the project is sustainable. So Ryan here said that they're the Center for Civic Engagement, so sustainability to us means finding and empowering students to take over programs, events, et cetera. So that's fantastic, as well as community members. And then a creation of annual events, maybe paid positions and policies and procedures that are in place. So definitely a theme here that all speaks to sustainability. So Kathy, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
You guys are you're grabbing onto it really well. What we pointed to here is in that idea of program sustainability. It's something that can actually stand on its own beyond what we might have the VISTAs actually do. As I mentioned earlier, I'm just going to do a light touch on sustainability on this particular slide. You should know that if you're thinking, oh, I need to know more about sustainability, it's a really important topic and it's a major responsibility of the VISTA sponsors. And it just happens that in the April webinar for supervisors, they're going to focus even more extensively on sustainability and explore ways that you could partner with your VISTA members to maximize your project's ability to fulfill its mission. So as we get closer to that April timeline, expect that you'll receive an email from VISTA once they open that registration so that you can actually get signed into that particular piece. Right now, I just want to lightly touch on and look at some of the things that you talked about. We talked in here about the human capacity, the volunteerism that we were looking at in this particular case, the program component, what system programs do we actually have, our communication system. And then with that, I also include some of the technology components that we have. And last but not least, we're talking about the financial capacity. Those four things really set up a program so that it does stand on its own. But the thing that I really like you to take a real close look at is this center component right here. It says that it's community and stakeholders. It's those communities and stakeholders that really hold those other four legs together and really help the process. I'd like you to keep that image in mind when we go into the next section when we're talking about community engagement, because that's where our communities and our stakeholders become so critical to what we do. Now, the thing I'd like you to keep in mind is that VISTAs aren't ultimately responsible for program sustainability. Their supervisors in the organizations are. So I'm asking you to hold sustainability as this background conversation that you have as you think about your VADs and bring that to the forefront. Let's go forward to the next slide and take a look at what that might look like. When it comes to the actual VISTAs and what they're doing, VISTA projects are going to build capacity to support program sustainability. And the two areas that we're looking at in that is that they're going to create, expand, and strengthen organizational systems and processes. That's what we commonly refer to as capacity building. The other thing that they're going to do is engage and empower community members and organizational partners. It's that two-pronged approach that's really going to help VISTAs take off in what they have to do. Now, when I talk about that building capacity, that create, expand, and strengthen organizational systems and processes, some of the things that I'm looking at when I think about those particular pieces is that VISTAs often assist the organizations in creating these systems such as tracking donors, tracking volunteers. And once those systems are up and running, they can actually enhance your ability to meet the community need long after your VISTA project ends. They also might be creating programs for community volunteers so that the volunteers can continue to work. People who support, frankly, we are in the community, people support what they help create. Community members are often dedicated to making the area where they live better, and successful projects involve the community in every single phase. We're also talking about improving the visibility and outreach. Sometimes VISTAs will create communications templates or build partnerships with local media that can really increase the stature in your community. And frankly, it brings crowds to your fundraising events and it can attract community members to your volunteer projects. The last piece I'm going to mention here, just something to think about, is building partnerships. VISTAs help facilitate mutually beneficial and lasting partnerships between you and other like-minded regional or national organizations. That second piece, engage and empower community members and organizational leaders. In that particular section, a VISTA project will engage residents of low-income communities in planning, development, and implementation of the project. You know, and I'm going to be honest with you, that's part of the piece that sometimes gets missed when I get to pre-service orientation. I'm looking at sample VADs of what the VISTAs are working with, or I'm looking at the supervisor's piece at supervisor training. Somehow we've forgotten to actually include the community members in what we do. VISTA places an importance on involving members in the community in our planning processes, mainly because by listening to the voices of those we're trying to help, we're more confident that we're meeting the needs of the community. And as a result, we're collaborating on solutions with the community directly rather than just providing a service. VISTA requires that you incorporate input from low-income communities in all phases of your project. And that involvement might take the form of advisory groups. You might also refer to as an advisory council, a board, a committee, a task force. You could also meet the requirements with significant representation of low-income communities on your board of directors. So it's thinking about how am I putting that into this VAD? And in particular, listing on your VAD, how exactly are the VISTAs interacting with these members of the community? I'm going to take us forward to the next slide. Because if we have those core components in our background that we know we've got to cover, we wanted to share this particular graphic because it highlights, and it's something we highlight in the VISTA supervisor orientation, and it captures some of the ways that we can use a VAD to help the VISTA year be more productive for the site and for the VISTA. And it leads to project success. You'll notice here that we're talking about the recruitment and outreach piece. Before the VISTA begins, we're starting to define who it is that we're looking for. And when you know who it is you're looking for, it's much easier to figure out, well, where do I find them and how do I connect with them? It helps you with the selection process of a VISTA. In that particular case, am I asking the right questions? My VAD will actually guide what questions I ought to be asking in an interview setting. And once the VISTAs actually get on site, in this particular case, we're helping the VISTAs get started and create a plan for continued development. We're guiding them along the way. And last but not least, we're assessing the performance. We're helping the VISTA and the project to find success and actually check those off, that we're leading those along the way. I'd like to find out how many of you are using the VAD for these kinds of things now. Let's go to our first poll and help us with that. I'd like you to check on there how many of you have used the VAD for, and if you've got multiple things, feel free to check off multiple ones.
Thank you, Kathy. So take a look at the poll. It's on the right hand of your screen. So how many of you have used your VAD for outreach and recruitment, selecting a VISTA candidate, guiding and supporting members, assessing performance, or if you haven't created a VAD yet, but you're looking forward to creating one soon? Definitely take some time if you've done, as Kathy said, if you've used it for more than just one of these, please mark down all the ones you've used it for. So we're going here as we wait for the poll results to come in. It looks like the poll has stopped, and we're waiting for those results now. All right, so those poll results should be here any second. We can see what the majority of you use the VAD for. All right, so it looks like we're all over the place here. So the majority of you use the VAD to guiding and supporting members, which is fantastic. Definitely a key piece, a very important piece of the VAD. Also, a lot of use for it for selecting a VISTA candidate and also assessing performance. But a lot of you also use it for outreach and recruitment. So all over the board here, a lot of different ways that you use the VAD. So Kathy, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
I just want to point out that I also see there's a number of people there who haven't created one yet, but I'm looking forward to it, or no answer at this point. Wherever you're at, it might be that it's new for you. Some of you, it might be a refresher. We hope this information will help inspire detailed VADs, no matter where you are in the process. We're going to get started talking about some of the key elements of a VAD. In this particular case, we put a sample VAD up on the right-hand side of the screen in order to help us with some basics for this. The organization in the sample is called Wakita Community Services, or WCS, and they run a youth mentoring project. We're going to use this particular sample VAD. Actually, it comes off of the VISTA campus, and so you're going to see it as the sample VAD that's also there as well. It's available on the VISTA campus as well as at the supervisor training. Amy is sharing a URL right now in the chat panel that just helps you know how exactly do I connect to it. And all the resources we share will be posted with the recording after the session. In case you were like, oh, I didn't catch that, not to worry. We're going to email these out when the recording and the resources are ready. So in this particular case, we're talking about key elements is having a title. For every VAD you create, you want to have a distinct title along the way. If you happen to be creating multiple similar VADs, consider creating a naming system. That might include attributing the year or creating a number or job number in addition to the descriptive title. And just as a tip, when you're creating multiple VADs for VISTAs doing similar work, you can save time by copying and pasting some elements of the text into those VADs. But remember, each VAD requires its own title, so it's clear who exactly it belongs to. The VADs require you to put in also some other project details along the way. Much of this information can be found in your project application. So if you want to make this really easy, check your application usually is available in your organization's e-grants account. So you can easily copy and paste the appropriate information directly over into these particular sections, and that way you've already got that part taken care of. Now, for the last 3 steps, we're going to actually take you through some slides that give you a little bit better idea, well, how do I do those sections? When we're talking about a project goal, the VAD should reflect the following. It should address the poverty mission of the project, as well as the activities should clearly show how the VISTA will build capacity at the organization or in the community. And we have the example from our project goal that's from the sample VAD right down below here. You're going to see that we're talking about addressing poverty. You know, they're helping to ensure that children of incarcerated parents receive the educational, social, and emotional support they need to help them break the cycle of poverty. And in this particular case, they talk about what activities are they actually going to do. They're developing a sustainable volunteer recruitment and management system for its mentoring program. We've actually laid that out. Now, just as a tip, you're going to see this along the upper side here. Copy and paste the goal from the project directly from the goal statement in your project plan. They should directly line up, so there's no reason not to be able to just take it directly from there. When we're talking about the objectives and member activities, which are a subset lower than those goal statements that we have, the objectives you identify for the VAD should articulate what the VISTA will accomplish during his or her assignment. Each VAD should include more than one objective and include completion dates for each objective. The objectives should form a bridge between your goal statements and the VISTA activities. So in this particular case, there's actually a jump over. You can see the tie-in that we have with our bridge. Here's activities, here are the activities that are going to actually help complete that particular piece. In this particular example down here, our sample we set up and said that we're going to set up outreach systems and build partnerships with community organizations in order to spread the word about mentor programs. And specifically, they're going to develop targeted marketing materials. The activities section of the VAD identifies more specifically what VISTAs will be doing to achieve that. And to begin, it really helps to start with the performance milestones in the action plan section of your project application and edit them into the appropriate activities. So use those milestones as a key as you go forward. I just want to point out a quick thing before we move this slide over. When you actually look at our sample VAD, one of the things that we're going to talk about in this next slide is this date right here. Something to watch for. Let's move forward to the next slide. The reason I mentioned that is that our sample VAD doesn't actually have any dates on it. The way that I would improve it, you know, the steps that we have here, we want to describe the outcomes for a set of activities in a sentence or two. Check that what you've written aligns with your goal statement. Does this make sense that you can get from there to there? But last but not least, you want to include a completion date. When do you want this done by? By when? Those are going to be critical because they give the VISTA a much better idea of how exactly this is all going to come together. Now, I just want to talk about when I do this kind of work with nonprofits, the easiest way for me to create and align my objectives, which you might also call my outcomes, with my goal statement is to ask, what would it look like if I were doing that already? What would I see happening in my community or in my organization? I would actually start listing those changed behaviors that I would see that tell me that we're actually going to be successful. And frankly, it helps me as an agency know what we need to do. I use what would I see, oh great, so here's the activities that I actually need to do. So my question becomes, if this is what I want to see happening, what capacity building do we need to do that? What resources do we need? What partnerships do we need? What materials do we need? And that literally starts to define for us what exactly are we asking the VISTAs to do. They're going to help us meet those pieces so that we can actually pull this off. Now, in the next few slides, I want to share with you some work that I've done with the supervisors. As I've spoken with supervisors at our session, we've talked about how could we strengthen our VADs or make it easier to create our VADs. And in talking, we actually came up with a 3-step process, recognizing that one piece of our objectives really need to be all about assessing, which is the introductory stage of what the VISTA's work is. The second step is ACT, This is the specific capacity building actions we're asking the VISTAs to do. And the third is transfer. This helps VISTAs and the sites complete the circle so sites can use what the VISTAs have done for long-term success. We're going to take a look at these and say, what does that look like exactly? This part right here, the level 1 objectives for the assess, this is the introduction stage of the VISTA's work. Often I've seen supervisors list things like attend meetings, which in fact is an activity that VISTAs will do, but frankly putting that on their VAD doesn't add anything to their understanding about the capacity building that the VISTAs would do. So I've literally stopped at that point when I see that on the VAD and I say to the supervisors, why? Why do you want the VISTAs to do that? And the list that you see here are some of their main explanations. The supervisors were trying to help their VISTAs start the work successfully. And so it became because I want the VISTAs to, and you can see on here, assess the current state of the volunteer systems, their fundraising, our development, our communications, our marketing, our partnerships that we have, our technology, whatever it is that's relevant to your project. They want to really get an understanding of what's the current state of our systems. We want to help identify and understand the key players and their part in addressing the community issues. We want to have them understand the historical environment of the project and the community. It's our chance to actually discuss how members of the target community will be engaged in leadership and implementation of this project. And that, my friends, is the heart of the community engagement piece. How are we helping them understand that section? Remember, this is look at the VAD at our interview and at our pre-service orientation, or PSO. And when they're there, they're trying to understand what you're asking them to do. Frankly, they're being asked to swear in, to say, yes, I'm taking this on for the next year. And if any of this part right here is unclear, that's when they get really nervous. I guess that's what I want to do. I'm not sure. I don't know what they want me to do. It really helps to be, it behooves us to really say, how can I make this clear? So we've talked about the goals, we've talked about the objectives. We want to take a little bit more time to look at these member activities and how they connect. Our sample VAD provides an example of this kind of objective. It says, assess the current state of WCS's efforts in reaching, selecting, and supporting volunteer mentors. I just want to note that if we strengthen, we added a date on this particular piece. We did that to actually strengthen the example that we had. At this point, Amy's going to put a question in the chat box for us, and I'd like to find out from you, what are some of the member activities that VISTA could use for this objective? What would you suggest? You look at that objective and you think, member activities, what kind of things could my VISTA do? We'd ask you to write those down in the chat box right now.
Thanks, Kathy. So as you take a couple of seconds here, a minute or two to enter your thoughts into the chat, assess the current state of WC's effort in reaching, selecting, and supporting volunteer mentors. So what are some of the activities a VISTA could do for this objective? So remember to put that in the chat panel, not the Q&A, just so we make sure we can see it, and make sure it's to all participants.
Jessica, I just want to add here too, don't worry about perfection, because frankly, this is really the easiest way to create these kind of activities. Brainstorm ideas and then go back to and pick and choose what you want to keep and refine them from there. I mean, literally, that's the easiest way to do that part of this. So just put out some ideas and then see if there's some in here that we really like and we want to hang on to.
Great, that's great advice. Thank you, Kathy. So some responses are coming in. So we have interview previous mentors to get their feedback. It's always a great way. Gather data on numbers of volunteers and the kinds of activities they have been involved in. Review current policies and documents, as well as procedures. And then assess the ways our organization engages with stakeholders and in the community. So these are fantastic. Let's see here, what else do we have? Research best practices and policies and procedures for mentor recruitment and work with the site supervisor to implement them. It's great, definitely making sure to loop the supervisor in, making sure, as Kathy mentioned, that the project itself is responsible for the sustainability of the project. So definitely want to make sure that VISTA and the supervisor are connected on all of those levels. Meet with staff and other people to get an understanding of their involvement in the program's strengths and weaknesses. So definitely seeing where other people consider a weakness, a strength of that program. Summarize his or her own experience and talk to the supervisor to kick off the process. Definitely assessing where Avista is currently at, where they're hoping to go, what they can bring to the table, what they're looking to get out of it, is a great way to start that conversation. We also have here research what others are doing and borrow from their successes. So definitely, you don't always have to reinvent the wheel. Definitely see what other programs are doing and borrow those ideas. Create a plan to engage community and stakeholders. So that can involve a whole bunch of different things. So definitely talking with the supervisor to create that plan. And then learn about how agencies that coordinate volunteers do the same thing. So kind of under the borrow thing. See what other people are doing, what other places have found successful, what roadblocks they've run into. These are great. So Kathy, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
This is wonderful because this is literally the process that we go through to say, okay, if we know what our goal is, we know what the objective is, here's some of the activities, and start brainstorming out, because now we can go in and clean them up. You guys you get the idea of what it is that we're trying to point to in this piece. I'm going to move us forward one more step. So far, when we talked about the objectives, we talked about the assess. I'm going to talk about the next level up, which is the act. And this is the section that's probably most supervisors are familiar with. That's the standard thing that they think of for capacity building. In this particular case, we're talking about creating tools or creating processes for that indirect work that we would be doing out in the the community with VISTAs or in our organizations. I'm just going to use an example of fundraising or fund development. If we were having VISTAs work on that particular area and we're creating tools, maybe we'd have them create a database of potential donors with due dates, contact information, and application procedures. Maybe we'd have them create a template for grant applications by program. Maybe we'd have them create a guide for branding all communication materials. Or perhaps we could have them create talking point sheets in order to guide volunteers and staff on what to say when making an ask for donations. So that's that kind of tools that we might make. When it comes to the processes, maybe we'd actually have them create a training for volunteers on how to make the ask, or to create a schedule for volunteers and staff to meet with donors, to actually work that schedule as they go forward. That's really the capacity building work that we have. And we have an example from the sample VAD. Of course, we would, add a date on this one as we do this. But in this case, the sample VAD said, let's set up outreach systems and build partnerships with community organizations in order to spread the word about the mentor program and develop those targeted marketing materials. That's really the key at that level. When we go to the last level, that level 3, which is the transfer, I started this conversation talking a little bit about sustainability, and this gives us the chance to keep our eye on sustainability. When I talk to VISTAs, I talk about all the capacity building activities they'll be doing, like writing grants, or doing assessments, or recruiting volunteers, or creating database, all of that, because it all builds capacity. But projects need to think about the sustainability beyond the VISTA's 1 year with the project. With the transfer, when we talk about transfer of knowledge, of products, of relationships, it takes it the next step, and it automatically allows us to do that because we've written it into the VAD. So in this particular case, let's say that the VISTAs were recruiting volunteers, which is a wonderful thing. But here's the question. Who else knows how to do that after the VISTA is gone? Who else have we transferred that knowledge to in this particular case? Well, we've had the VISTAs create a database. Another wonderful thing. But who else knows how to create or update a database after the VISTA is gone? We always have to be looking at the transfer of knowledge. Who can the VISTA train? And how we do that training might feed into the whole products piece. That products are, what products can the VISTA leave behind for the organization and the community to use? You know, it might be a database, it might be a manual. Any of that could be something that we leave behind as a product. And that last piece of that relationship building that we do, the thing to keep in mind with that, and particularly like I'm talking about volunteers and talking about donors, if a VISTA recruits volunteers, wonderful, but here's the thing. Volunteers join because they like the person who recruited them. How are the VISTAs connecting those volunteers to the organization so they stay when the VISTA leaves? VISTAs do, get new donors, which is also a wonderful thing. But relationship building is critical to getting and keeping donors. How are the VISTAs connecting them to the organizations? That transfer of relationship, how the VISTAs connect these folks with the staff and volunteers, is really key to how we're actually going to keep this work going long after they leave. So the supervisors are really helpful in helping us think about those three areas. I'm going to ask you to do some sample work in this area. We'd like to find out what activities could you include in the VAD to ensure the sustainability of your program. We'd just ask you to put your ideas down in the chat box there. Be sure to send it to all participants. What activities could you include in a VAD to ensure the sustainability of your program? Thinking about that transfer of knowledge, transfer of products, transfer of relationships.
Great, thank you, Kathy. So we're already getting a lot of responses here in the chat. So what activities could you use or could you conclude in a VAD to ensure the sustainability of a program? So we have introduction to key players, different community members, people that they will need to know, training staff prior to the completion of the term, which is fantastic. You definitely don't want the VISTA to be gone and then realize we don't know how to do what they've been doing this whole time. So definitely doing that while they're still there. Let's see, train designated staff member, possibly the supervisor, on how to use the materials, like we just said. Develop resource base for the future, whether that's a legacy binder, if they did some event, what were the lessons learned, all those sorts of things in order to make it more efficient next time. Detailed policies to maintain and update website and other communication channels, which is fantastic. Let's see, participating in staff meetings, making sure they know what's going on with the project as a whole. Developing ongoing partnerships, sponsorships, and multi-year pledges from individual donors. Those are always a great way, and that can also be tied into knowing those key players in the community. Let's see here, what else? A lot of stuff coming in. So a lot of talk about a sustainability binder, that can include notes on the volunteer's profile, what the volunteer has done, what they've implemented, where things currently are in the process, especially if you have a first-year VISTA going to a second year or a second year to a third, or even a third to no more VISTA. These are great to have so that if anybody has a question, you can look right there and they kind of already have that all compiled. And I do see someone here put a brain binder. I do like that name for it. Let's see, creating training sessions for staff and volunteers on how to use the materials. So yes, we have all these materials, but how on earth do I use them? Great. We need the VISTAs there to help us do that, train them, let them know exactly what's in those binders so when they leave, staff can take that over. And we'll end here with this one, to host quarterly volunteer leadership meetings to make sure relationships with organizations, members, and other staff is strengthened for long-term sustainability. So definitely keeping one another engaged. It's hard, especially for some of you maybe who have multi-sites, who are intermediaries. If you guys can come together, even with just different organizations within the community that you may not get together all that often or only talk every now and then, having those designated times to come together will really strengthen those bonds. So these are great suggestions to include on those VADs. So Kathy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
I got to tell you, I'm going to be excited about seeing these future VADs coming in with all the ideas that are coming in right now. So I'm going to keep us moving forward. I want to go over just some of the logistical things that will help in the process of creating these. What you see on this slide is the format for writing objectives and member activities on the VAD. Once we have our brainstorm list of the items, we can clean them up and put them in proper format. In this particular case, Amy's sharing a link to additional VAD resources on the VISTA campus for us in the chat. But you can see here that we've got that objective and then the activity and sub-activities that will go underneath it as a way to format what we do. And we want to take a little bit closer look at the member activities when we come to the next slide. In this particular case, we want to just help people think about how you begin your sentences. Start your activity sentences with action verbs. That might be things like, the VISTAs will launch, they'll market, they'll research, they'll collect, they'll assess, they'll compile. Whatever that might be, but we want to make sure that there's action verbs to describe what they're going to be doing. We want to actually write clear and specific activity, but without too much detail. Just so you know, there's a limit from 2,500, I can't say this right, 2,500 character limit within the eGrant system for each activity, which is about 500 words. So choose wisely which ones you're putting in. And they're also going to post a list of action verbs to help inspire you along with this recording when we finish up here. The core thing in this is to be specific and simple. We need to strike a balance between specifics and simplicity. If the activities in the VAD are too general, the VISTA won't understand what he or she is supposed to do. On the other hand, if there's too much detail in the activities, innovation and flexibility is going to get stifled. Now, ideally, when I look with supervisors and with VISTAs, 3 pages is probably a good length for a VAD. I want to be honest with you, the requirement says eGrant asks for just 1 paragraph. Frankly, 1 paragraph's too short, but that's all that they ask for as a minimum. So I have this to show up with 1 paragraph, and they feel like they're at loss because they don't really know what it is they should be doing. 3 pages is a little more ideal. By the other hand, I've had this to show up with 12 pages of a VAD. That's too much. Too much activity, too much detail. We need to get a little bit in between there, probably close to that 3-page range. We also ask you just to be realistic about what we're asking them to do. We don't want to be over-ambitious. I give you an example here. When I was working with one of the supervisors, they were looking at a VAD that they inherited, and it says, well, Kathy, they're going to recruit 100 new volunteers in the first month. And we both looked at each other and said, really? I don't think so. So we have to think about like what's realistic for what it is that we can actually do. And delineate in your VADs for each year of the project. What are the tasks for year 1? Maybe it's creating the systems and other startup tasks. That's going to differ substantially from those in year 3, where maybe we're doing some more training and carrying on the project and other wind down tasks. So starting to identify how the project will progress demonstrates a specific plan for achieving the project objectives. In your chat box, we're going to give you a chance to actually create some of these sub-activities. Enter your ideas in here. We have an activity where they're establishing a volunteer system and building partnerships with community organizations. We've chosen specifically set up a recruitment system. What are some sub-activities that could go with setting up a recruitment system? What kind of things would you say? What would you have of this to do? They should just go ahead and the chat box and put down some of your ideas.
Thanks, Kathy. So just take a minute or 2 here. Remember, when you submit your response, make sure to submit it in the chat box and to select all participants. So write a sub-activity for the following member activity to set up a recruitment system. So what are some sub-activities that they might do? So we're getting some responses here in the chat. We have your create an interview form. That's fantastic. So start off, what are we going to ask volunteers? What are we looking for in those volunteers we're trying to recruit? Create a volunteer description. So people want to know what they're going to volunteer for. Those are fantastic. Put those in there. What are they going to do? And that'll definitely help during the interview process. If they're applying to volunteer as a tutor, but they don't like reading, then it's not going to be very helpful. So definitely want to make sure that that those 2 match, and you can develop both of those to get the answers and the volunteers that you want. Talk to staff currently in charge of recruitment and find out strengths and weaknesses of existing processes. So great. Even maybe do a wish list, something like that. You know, what kind of help does the organization need? What kind of recruitment and volunteers does the project need? Where are they lacking? What do they do really well? Getting that feedback from staff, especially maybe staff that don't necessarily work day-to-day with volunteers, but would maybe like to see more volunteers help in the areas that they think the project really needs them. Develop background check forms, great. A mentor application. Give trainings to those volunteers. That's another way to do the recruitment system. Meet with community service groups. So, you know, sometimes they want to do big group projects. Maybe they have an annual one or a monthly group project. Definitely meeting with those different service groups and finding a big project. You know, 5 volunteers can get a ton done in 1 hour. Let's see, develop orientation for volunteers. So once you have them, once they've applied, once they've been selected, orienting them to the project, to the organization, making sure that they're a right fit, notifying local community organizations of need of volunteers, so spreading that word out. Where do we need them? What are we looking for? And definitely word of mouth is a great way to recruit. Let's see. And then notify local, oh no, I already did that one, I'm sorry. Provide overall communication among prospective and current volunteers. So definitely you want to make sure you keep in the loop the current volunteers that you have, as well as search for new volunteers. And yeah, debrief form, so definitely if volunteers leaving or if they've done some work with you, debrief. What did they like? What would they like to see change? What else would they like to do? Definitely getting that feedback is always great. You guys have submitted a lot here. So Kathy, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
They've got a great list, and hopefully this makes it a whole lot easier because you can start to think about all these kind of ideas, and that's literally the game when we're creating our VADs. I'm going to move us to the next slide. Just a reminder that the VAD is a living document. We get to use a VAD for outreach, for selecting, for guiding, for assessing. We are talking about tailoring those to the needs of the community and the organization. You create an initial VAD that actually helps you get started. And that VAD is used to recruit and select a candidate for the VISTA spot. But you might see a new opportunity that could help your project because of the unique skills, connections, or experience that your selected VAD VISTA brings to your site. VADs can and often do change with limits, such as if the changes in the VAD you are considering change the measurable outcomes you are tracking for the evaluation, that impacts all of your partners, and that's something you really need to discuss with them first. You've got to be thinking about if you're a sub-site, what about my sponsoring organization, the state office, everybody else up the line, how is this going to impact them if I make this change? So we've got to make sure that we have sign-off and a communication in that particular process. It is a living document. It can be adapted as the project evolves and the unique strengths of the VISTA become apparent. Amy's going to be sharing with you in the chat box one of the pieces, the samples that are on adapting VADs that is on the VISTA campus. It's one that's done by the University of Wisconsin Extension. They were putting together a form that helped them think through if I need to make changes, if I realize that there's something I have to adjust, how would I go about it? So it can just be a great help in that process. As always, make sure you check on any significant changes to the VAD. Really need to be talked about with your corporation state office before you make them. I just want to recap. We tried to take today to spend some time talking about the key elements of an effective VAD. We wanted to look at those member activities and make sure that they reflect the capacity building and that community engagement piece. And we wanted to work with VADs as a living document that's tailored to the needs of the community and the organization. As you go forward, we're asking you to review your existing VADs with a critical eye. Think about, is there anything that I would adjust on these? We ask you to create a customized VAD for each member. We ask you to add date ranges, or as I like to call them, by when dates to each objective. Detail out the sub-activities for each objective, and update those VADs that may be out of date. And as you're looking through, try to ensure that every candidate has an up-to-date and complete VAD for their use before they come to the pre-service orientation. Have them have that in hand so they're ready to go. So when they come to pre-service orientation, they get a chance to actually take this all in. Because oftentimes when I talk with the VISTAs, they've looked at the VAD, but then when we go through our session where we look through it with a more critical eye, they suddenly realize they have all kinds of questions, and it really helps to have more detail there to clarify some of those pieces. I'm trying to hit some highlights with you in a little bit of time. Jessica, I'm going to turn it over to you so that we can handle some of the questions that are coming through.
Thanks, Kathy. And thank you, everyone, for staying with us here today and for joining us. As you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen, we have an evaluation we would love if you would take. We want to know what you thought, and please take a moment to answer the questions. We like to be able to improve these webinars, and your input helps us greatly. We'd like to know what you'd like to see, what you liked about this webinar, what else do you have questions about. So please just take a few moments to go ahead and do that, and then we'll get started with the question and answer session. So as we get started with Q&A, I do want to ask the operator to let us know how to ask a question over the phone. Operator, are you there?
Yes, at this time, if you would like to ask a question, you may press star followed by the number 1. Please remember to unmute your phone and record your first and last name clearly when prompted. Once again, if you'd like to ask a question via the phone, press star 1 and record your name. One moment as we wait for our first question.
Thank you. So as we wait for the first question to come in, let's ask some that may have come into the chat. And once again, if you'd prefer to ask a question through the Q&A, Amy just posted in the Q&A, and we'll make sure to get that answered. There was a question that came up earlier with regard to summer associates. Someone asked a question that they may have to write a VAD for each objective and not necessarily multiple objectives in one VAD. Summer associates do have one VAD. As we're getting close to the summer associate recruitment time, start time, and all of those sorts of things, I'm sure you have a lot of questions about that and exactly how you need to draft a VAD for summer associates. Summer associates are a little bit different from our full-time VISTA members. Summer associates serve anywhere from about 54 to 70 days during the summer months, and their tasks and what they're allowed to do are a little bit different from the full-time VISTA members. So if you have questions about exactly what is required for the VAD of a summer associate, you definitely want to follow up with either your project director or if you are the project director, follow up with your program officer in the corporation state office, and they'll be able to provide a little bit more clarification for that because we want to make sure that you are on the right page with the VADs as well as the members coming in. So let's turn it over to the phone here. Do we have any questions that have come in over the phone?
Currently, there are no questions in the phone queue.
Okay, great, thank you. So a question that came in during registration and some of the themes that we've seen here today, and I'm going to send this one over to you, Kathy. We had a question here about how to keep my VADs in line with my VISTA's skills.
Great question. I actually would probably have us maybe switch that around just a little bit because you're talking here about how do I keep my VADs in line with my VISTA skills. I would actually do the reverse and recruit VISTAs who have the skill sets in line with your VAD. It's a difference between really warm body recruitment, which is a system where anybody will do, and targeted recruitment. Targeted recruitment, where you know specifically who I'm looking for and bringing those skill sets in, it will actually help you be far more successful with your project. So if you can, I would actually try to come at this and say, what skills do I need? And my VAD, if I've laid it out within the program correctly, will actually tell me what skills I need. It'll actually help me recruit, get the right people, ask the right questions, so I can get those people in line from there.
That's great. Thank you, Kathy. Another question that came in through the chat was, would an initial implementation of a developed process be part of an assessment role? So, and I'm assuming here, and please, if this is not the question you're asking, please put this in the Q&A or please clarify for me. It sounds like you're asking if there's already a current process at the organization, maybe for a tutoring program. Let's go with a tutoring program. Could the VISTA participate in that tutoring program to get an idea of what that process is before they start maybe making changes or recruiting for it or those sorts of things? Definitely, a VISTA being able to understand what they're recruiting for and what their VISTA position is asking them for, it's definitely wise of them to participate in those sorts of things in order to, assess all the elements of it, be able to recruit. A key thing about VISTA is that VISTA does indirect service. So they should not be doing direct service. What that means is if there's a tutoring program that the VISTA is supposed to continue to build up or to implement, they shouldn't be the ones actually tutoring maybe children or so on. They should be developing that program. So, so that's something to keep in mind here. We definitely understand that, in order to understand how to recruit volunteers for a position, VISTA may need to understand what all is entailed in that. Maybe you need to understand what that position is like. So those sorts of things are okay, but definitely the VISTA should not be focused on direct service activities.
Using it as a training opportunity. I always try to coach the supervisors and say, know why. If you're asking them to do a short-term direct service assignment, know why. How is this going to build the capacity building that they're going to do?
That's great. Thank you, Kathy. Operator, are there any questions on the phone?
There are no questions.
Great. So we did get another question through the Q&A, and Kathy, I'm going to ask you here first. When you spoke about adapting VADs, what constitutes major changes that need to be discussed with the state office versus small changes that don't need to be run by CNCS?
Big changes would be if you're changing the goals, and if you're changing something that changes the collection of outcome measures and performance measures that you're doing. If it suddenly makes it incompatible with the objectives that you're collecting for evaluation, that's something you actually need to talk about, because you've got to make sure that you have some evaluation systems still in place. So those at that level, that's where the state is like, wait a minute. But if it's smaller than that and it's not going to impact those evaluation components, then they're generally willing to work with you on that much easier.
That's correct, Kathy. Thank you. And remember, it also is what you applied for the VISTA to be for. So when you applied for VISTA resources, you had a goal in mind, you had something that the VISTA would be doing in order to meet that goal. So definitely any of those kind of big changes or deviations from what you put on the application is something that needs to be run by the corporation. If you are a supervisor or a sponsor or a project director, and maybe you just came on and you're not the one who wrote the application, you're just kind of coming in here and you are inheriting this VISTA program, you definitely want to go to eGrants and you definitely want to pull that project application and give it a good look just to see what was put in that initial application, so that you know kind of what's expected, what was agreed upon, and all of those sorts of things. And your program officer at the state office is a great resource. They should definitely be able to help you locate that if you don't know where that's at, and help you interpret what's going on with that. So that's fantastic.
And can I just mention in there too, if you're working on a project and you realize that what you thought would work isn't working with the community, that's a wonderful learning opportunity, because then it gives us a chance to analyze and say, why isn't this working? Is there something else we have to do? That's also a conversation that you want to have with your state office, but because it's a teaching opportunity for them to know we need to make an adjustment because what we assume to be true is not in fact the case.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. And I know we're a little over time here. I know we have at least one more question in the chat. I'm going to ask the phone. Do we have any questions over the phone? I'm sorry, operator.
It's okay. No, we don't. And again, it's *1 and record your name if you do want to ask a question over the phone.
Great, thank you. So I'm not sure if we're going to get any more questions over the phone, so we're going to ask this one last, or we're going to go over this last question that came in. Someone here in the chat asked, could an organization hire a VISTA following their service after they have developed a project or program and are the best qualified? So the short answer to that is yes. So definitely if an organization wants to hire maybe a VISTA that has served, it's definitely something they can do. I'm sure there may even be supervisors on this call who were once VISTAs at the organization that they currently are employed by. So that definitely is something that you can do. One thing to keep in mind when hiring VISTAs, or just VISTAs in general, VISTAs in their position should not be taking over the position of someone who's left. So if your HR person recently left and you're like, oh great, I can get a VISTA to fill it, fantastic. That's not what a VISTA resource is supposed to be for, but definitely it happens where a VISTA has served at an organization and then they later become hired on. So that's definitely in the realm of things that have happened, that can happen, and it's a great way to acknowledge the service and the benefits that national service brings to an organization. Kathy, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yes, please. I have VISTAs who have come into pre-service orientation who looked at me and said, well, they are going to hire me afterwards, aren't they? And I'm like, gang, whoa, assumptions. That is not the design of VISTA. There is no obligation for them to hire you. It could happen, but it is not anything that's expected or a part of the design of how this works. So you really want to get it adjusted here in what your expectations are along the way. So just to be really clear with folks ahead of time, just so you have that clarity up front.
That's great, Kathy. Yeah, we definitely don't want to have anybody having any false expectations or to have the project put in an awkward situation as well, because maybe the person who made that quote-unquote promise that they would maybe get hired is no longer there, and just like Kathy said, managing expectations. So one last time, operator, are there any questions over the phone?
There are no questions from the phones.
All right. Well, we want to thank you all. I know we've taken up a little bit more extra of your time here, so we do appreciate you staying on with us. Definitely, if you still have questions, this is not the last time you'll be able to ask us. If you do have further questions, you can email us at vistawebinars@cns.gov. That will be shown here on the next slide, which is right up here. And please join us for our next webinar in our three-part series. It's Crafting a Compelling Service Opportunity Listing. So in January, we did a webinar that was about recruitment, and now we're doing one about VADs, and the next one is about crafting a compelling service opportunity listing. That will be March 15th from 2 p.m. Eastern, and we hope to see you there. Once again, thank you all so much, and have a great rest of your day.